I probably get asked this question several times per week, but this past weekend, I got it asked more times than I ever have. So I decided to push the other videos that I had planned and scheduled to be released this Wednesday aside for this specific video and this specific question. The question that I've been receiving is, what do I think about peptides? Now, before I break down exactly what my answer is, I want to explain to you what that question means to someone like me who knows what I'm talking about. First and foremost, what is a peptide? A peptide is simply just a chain of proteins, right? There are thousands of different peptides that you either ingest, that your body creates, or has some function in physiology. So when somebody asks, what do I think about peptides? Sarcastically, I'm like, oh, I think they're great, right? Proteins are great. They accomplish specific things, right? But obviously from a more serious standpoint, I know what people are asking when they ask, what do I think about peptides? They're talking about not only peptides, but the research chemicals that are out online and that are getting pushed and the fad that's in. So I'm going to give some examples of peptides. I'm going to give some examples of research chemicals. I'm going to give some examples of what I think are efficacious ones or ones worth your time, but then also give you a little bit of insight into the industry. So first and foremost, understand that a lot of the things that people label as peptides are not actually peptides. Okay, so they range from anything from BPC 157, which would be considered a peptide, right, all the way to SLU332, SLUPP, MOTC, semaglutide, retatrutide, glow, GHK copper. Like a lot of these things are not just chains of protein, they're actual like research chemicals. What I will also say, 99% of these things have not been studied on humans. And if they do have human studies or trials on there, they don't go too far in depth and they do not have a long history of efficacy and there's no approval. That is a big important piece to me because a lot of companies have popped up, especially that source their stuff overseas, that sell these things as legitimate, but there's no quality control and there's no way to assure that you are getting exactly what you're talking about. So when somebody asks me, what do I think about peptides? In general, I think there's a usage, but what I always go back to and I will always ask is, what do you think you need peptides for? Right? Again, I'm not even getting specific to explain them that they're labeling them wrong, but ask yourself this, what do you need a peptide for? What peptide do you need and what do you need it for? First off, if you can answer the question what you need it for, you can start to narrow down which the ones that are going to be efficient for you and worth your time to even look at. Because what people think is, oh, I need to be on peptides to biohack or to optimize things because all these shitty influencers are out there pushing this stuff, but they're not specifying which ones. And so people think like, oh, this peptide does good stuff. This peptide does good stuff. So I'm just going to take all of them, right? It's the same example that I give for anything else when I program things for my clients, right? There always needs to be a why. Why am I giving this specific over-the-counter supplement? Why am I giving this specific workout? Why am I giving this specific meal or piece of nutrition? There needs to be a reason, right? If you don't have a deficiency, for instance, in vitamin C, right? Why am I going to give someone vitamin C? Why am I going to overdose them? There's no harm in it, but also why am I going to do that and waste their money? There are things that are harmful, right? Vitamin A, extremely harmful in high doses, right? Why am I going to give someone something and dose them higher in vitamin A if it's going to be a risk to them, especially if they're not deficient, right? So a lot of these things don't necessarily have blood work or parameters that you can look at in order to be able to determine that deficiency. But I will tell you, most people do not have a deficiency where these things are going to come into effect. So now that we got through that, we can talk about some specific things, okay? I have some partial anecdotal evidence on myself, a lot of evidence with my clients, and then I've seen a lot of the anecdotal evidence out there on some of these specific peptides. Some of the stronger, more formidable research ones are things like BPC 157, a little bit less, but still somewhat strong, TB 500, right? And then you have things like methylene blue, right? Again, not so much a peptide, more of a compound. Again, methylene blue is its own set of risks and versus reward, which I think are very poor. But there are not very many out there that really have anything other than a talking head on YouTube really spewing great things about that have a discount code for that specific thing. What you got to understand is none of this stuff is really groundbreaking. It really is not, okay? It gets marketed and sold as a new thing. But it's the same thing even when you look at like anabolics and steroids, okay? Everyone talks about like, ooh, this new steroid cycle, this new steroid is the greatest thing. But like there were great physiques, there was health, there was all this before that. So I always say like, be very wary of someone saying like, this is the holy grail. Now, on the flip side of that, I do think sometimes science is behind, right? If we were to always wait for the science, there's some things that we wouldn't get the benefit from until decades later, right? When like, you know, we know it's good now and we've seen enough and we probably benefit from it now. Now, I'm not saying like you should never follow science or you should always follow science. You just need to learn like to make decisions for yourself, and also take advice and listen to people who actually can explain themselves and give you some workable and understandable evidence and information, right? That's why I even make a video like this. I actually have an affiliation with a company who sells all these things. I don't ever push them or have these products plastered all over my page or given to my clients just to make a quick buck, because it's dangerous, right? There's no benefit to it. I use these things as sort of a tool when I see that there's a need. But other than that, I don't really see a benefit of me talking about it or giving them to somebody, especially someone random on Instagram has asked me what I think. I'm not just gonna be like, yeah, take this and here's a dose. Like, if someone does that to you, they have an affiliate code in their bio. They probably make money off of it, and they're making money off of you, right? So let's go again, back down to the question, because that's why I'm making a video on this. It's not very simple. What do I think about peptides? Ultimately, I think if there's a deficiency or there's a need, then you could start to begin about the use case, okay? About you actually using them. Now, once you get to that decision of, hey, this is something I can use for something that I'm lacking or that I'm deficient in, you look at the risk versus reward. A lot of time, the risk is these things are not studied on humans. They're not sourced correctly. You don't even know if they are what they are, and they're extremely expensive for what they give. I'm gonna give a perfect example right here, okay? Growth hormone releasing peptide, GHRP3, right? Even IGF LR3, so insulin growth like factor LR3, okay? Which is like a peptide form of IGF that helps stimulate your own IGF production, okay? Don't need to know essentially what they do or what they are. Just understand that there are peptides out there that mimic what growth hormone actually does. Now, they don't just mimic what it does. What they do is a signal for your body, okay, to release more or to create more of something. In this case, growth hormone. If your body's already maxed out on what it can produce, this does nothing. The issue is people don't test to see what they're even at or if they're even deficient. So they spend all this money on this very expensive peptide, these peptides, to not even know if they even could benefit from it, right? And in reality, 99% of the time, they could do this through diet, exercise, sleep, recovery, right? The things that people don't really want to hear, but are actually the things that are going to work, right? So they take these peptides, spend a bunch of money, which is stupid. Where on the flip side, I would say what's a step below just getting your exercise, training, recovery, and all that optimized, but a step above buying a peptide is, in this case, taking actual growth hormone. The hormone itself that your body recognizes that is actually the goal you're trying to achieve. Because you can control this, you know that it's going to work, and you know what the benefits are going to be. Instead of assuming that you're going to increase or optimize your own levels, which you don't even test to know in the first place, at least take the thing that is going to do that. So that's a one-off scenario, okay? Something like a BPC 157 or TB 500, right? There is some pretty good evidence to its use, and I've personally used it and I've gotten some benefit from it. But again, what's the risk versus reward? For me, my reward was I had a torn quad tendon, so I was willing to do anything to try and make it better, okay? There are other interventions that I took, so it's very hard to say how much of it was the BPC 157 TB 500. I do think there was some benefit, but again, the risk was, hey, maybe it's not what it is, maybe it's a money thing, but like, the risk was not that great for me to not at least try this out. But things like mitochondrial support, right? MOTS-C or methylene blue, or there's some other ones out there, SR, SS31, I forgot the name. Why do you necessarily think you need mitochondrial support, right? Also, there is a harm in optimizing or having your mitochondria work overdrive. If you have an extremely inflammatory or high oxidative stress environment, you're only gonna make things worse, okay? So it is important to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason I'm making this video is to give you a little bit of insight, what goes through my mind when that question's asked, and the questions that you should be asking yourself, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, people don't want to hear what works, and it's really optimizing your training, nutrition, supplementation, and recovery, something that a coach like me could give. They want to hear the easy answer that they could just throw money at. I would argue, like, throw money at a coach that's going to be cheaper and give you much more. So this isn't turning this into a sales pitch, it's just the reality of things. If you enjoy this information, obviously subscribe to this channel. If you like more information on what it would take for us to work one-on-one, for me to coach you, feel free to fill out the application in my bio or reach out to me directly. Or if I sent this to you via Instagram or some sort of message, shoot me back an I'm in or I'm interested, and I will happily get you the information there.